Hello, good evening to everybody out there. My name is Michael Hennessy here in Teagasc in Oak Park this evening. So delighted to welcome you to the second part of the National Crops Forum. I'm delighted that there's so many people online already. It's great to see people online this evening, given that it's such a beautiful weather out there. So, given I suppose the current weather that's there, kind of reminds me a little bit of the weather all the way through this year so far. It's all just a little bit too late. It's kind of like the rains in June. You would have hoped they came about a month earlier, but kind of the same with this weather. You would have hoped it came about a month earlier for the harvest. So look, I suppose most growers are kind of finishing up a bit of beans. I'm sure some people are on combine still trying to finish off that. There's probably a little bit of straw left on the ground, but I think for the most part, harvest is pretty well near finished up at this stage. So hopefully as the harvest is in, it obviously hasn't been one of the best ones and probably won't go down in memory as a good harvest necessarily. But people or farmers should be taking stock of the harvest at the moment and just of the year that's gone by, how things have panned out, what crops yielded well and what didn't yield well. So I think it's a good time to have a look at that. And so looking forward to the future, I'm sure people are looking, I suppose, at there's many practical and agronomic challenges coming over the next number of years ahead, and it is going to be very difficult. But it's not just here at home or within your own home farm. There's other challenges from a regulatory point of view and also kind of from market challenges out there as well. So it's very easy, I suppose, for people to look at all the changes that are coming up and be a bit despondent, maybe a little bit foreboding or look at it with a sense of doom and gloom a little bit. However, I suppose tillage farmers being tillage farmers and maybe farmers in general, they generally tend to grasp some of the opportunities they have in the past, and I'm sure there certainly will be lots of opportunities in the future. So I'm delighted to welcome all our speakers today. First up is Dale Crammond from the Department of Agriculture, and he's going to touch upon some of the main points of how the policy is going to be shaped in Ireland over the next 10 years. Then Professor Michael Wallace from UCD, he's going to outline the scale and the breadth, I suppose, really, of the economic impact of the tillage industry in Ireland, because it's much bigger maybe than people think. And that's following on from the excellent report that Michael produced and published about a month ago. And finally, Donald Fitzgerald from Gold Crop, and he's also the chair of the Teagasc Stakeholder Consultative Group, will outline the key recommendations from Crop's 2030 report, which is a strategic plan for the crop sector over the next 10 years. And in fairness to stakeholders, they consulted widely to put this report together, and it contains a lot of specific actions that are very challenging, but we think achievable over the coming years. And we're also joined by Pat Ryan of Liffey Mills, who's part of that stakeholder group, to answer questions as they're going to come up through the evening. So look, we're going to be on for the next hour or so, and I'm sure you're going to stay with us throughout the whole thing. So we are very much encouraging you to ask questions. So if you think of something as one of our speakers is talking along the way, type it into to the chat section. So you'll see the chat section on the Q&A, either on the if you're looking at this on a mobile up on the top up here, or if you're on your desktop, it's kind of down in here, a Q&A session here. Just click onto that and type in your question and hit send, and away you go. And we'll try and answer as many questions as we can towards the end. Just to say, we are going to record this webinar and it's going to be put up on the Teagasc YouTube site very shortly, where we have all of our YouTube videos there, so you can go back and have a look at parts if you missed it or you want to refresh it thereafter. So with all the introductions over, I'm going to invite Dale Crammond to share his screen and start a presentation. So Dale, if you'd share your screen, it's across and over to you. And I just might ask my other contributors just maybe to turn off their videos while Dale is presenting.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me okay, Michael?
Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Dale Crammond. I work in Climate Change Division in the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. It's great to be here with you this evening, on this lovely evening. The Crammon family have long been associated with growing crops in Naboke and County Wicklow. So I'm delighted to be among you this evening, just to kind of outline, I suppose, some of the policy direction for agriculture in general, and I suppose how it, in particular it will impact on the tillage sector over the coming years. So primarily I'm here to give an update, I suppose, on the European Green Deal and more specifically on the farm to fork strategy. So the farm to fork strategy is one part of the European Green Deal that was announced last year. The farm to fork strategy was published in May this year. And I guess what it is, it's a strategic direction, you know, where the European Commission wants to take agriculture over the next 10 years and beyond, I suppose, as we look to try and become a climate neutral continent. And agriculture will certainly have to play its part in that. And there are going to be opportunities there, but there will be challenges too. So look, the farm to fork is certainly, it's complex. In the past, like working in the department, we would have mostly dealt with DG Agri. Occasionally we would have dealt with DG Sante, and more recently with DG Climate and DG Environment. But all these DGs in Brussels now are all involved in shaping this farm to fork strategy. So that creates a challenge, because you're no longer just dealing with one department where we would have very good established relations, particularly in DG Agri. So look, as I said, it was published on the 20th of May. It's not a legally binding document. And that's one thing I would like to kind of point out at the outset. The Commission are going to have to kind of propose legislative targets, you know, in the years ahead. But at the moment, this is a direction of travel, and I'll expand a little bit in later slides how that could impact and what we expect will happen, you know, on farms in Ireland. So why are they doing this? Like, what are the overall goals? I suppose it's very clear, you know, the environmental and the climate footprint of the food system is a big part of it. The society is demanding, you know, that we produce more climate efficient food. Citizens of Europe have become ever more vocal, and they're taking more of an interest in where their food comes from. So you're all familiar with these challenges, and this is nothing new to you. I guess at the heart of it as well is ensuring food security and public health. Like, the public health part of this is very new. We're well used to dealing with the Commission on agriculture issues, but this interface between agriculture and public health is a new transition for us, and it's something that we're learning to understand as we engage with the Commission on this farm to fork strategy. I guess, look, Europe see themselves as a global leader. They're one of the biggest exporters of agricultural products and one of the biggest importers in the world. So they want to play a leadership role in transitioning towards this more, you know, sustainable model of agri-production across the world. Obviously, as I said, there's going to be new opportunities. But ultimately, they're looking to create this robust and resilient food system. We've seen the food system has held up very well, you know, particularly in Ireland, you know, through this recent COVID pandemic. Obviously, we've had some issues in the meat plants, but I guess that's not unexpected given the conditions that workers, you know, work so closely together in the meat plants. So look, what are the big targets for sustainable food production? I'm sure you've kind of heard some of these targets, and they're probably some of the things that are kind of causing you most concern. You will see I've put a box, I guess, around 3 of them here that might, you know, impact on the tillage sector most of all. So one of the objectives is to reduce by 50% the overall use and risk of chemical pesticides, and reduce by 50% of more hazardous pesticides. There's an objective there to reduce nutrient losses by 50% while ensuring no deterioration in soil fertility. This will reduce nutrient fertilizers by at least 20%. And finally, there's an objective to achieve at least 25% of the EU agricultural land under organic farming. And look, we in Ireland are coming from a very low base in terms of organic farming. We would have, we only have a couple of percent under organic farming. So it's going to be very difficult for Ireland to, you know, transition to that, because that would be like nearly a million hectares, which is not achievable, let's be honest. So look, the Commission are going to have to work with member states, you know, in terms of framing, you know, realistic targets. But overall, as a continent, these are averages where they want to transition to. So look, just some of these actions, you know, again, I've highlighted some of the issues in the red box that are maybe most particular to the tillage sector. They are going to review the sustainable use of pesticides directive and the enhancement of integrated pest management. Like IPM is going to become a bigger part of what we do on tillage farms in Ireland. There's going to be a revision to facilitate plant protection products containing biological active substances. So, you know, that move towards, you know, more kind of nature-based biological substances, that's something that we're going to see more of also. I've touched on the organic thing, and I guess I've touched then on the integrated nutrient management. It's going to become, you know, important. But look, the tillage sector are starting in a very good place when it comes to nutrient management. As a sector in Ireland, and I guess outside this country also, the tillage sector is the most efficient user of nutrients. It's much more efficient in the nitrogen and phosphorus that we apply than the livestock sector is, for example. So that's a positive for the tillage sector, you know, when it comes to farm to fork. So look, we're all going to have to work together on this. You know, farmers aren't going to be able to do this on their own. The industries and the processors can't do it on their own. You know, we're all going to have to come together to try and, you know, lead this transition to a more sustainable future. You know, research and innovation is going to be absolutely key in this challenge, over the years ahead. There's definitely things out there that we don't know about at the moment that are going to become mainstay in tillage farms, you know, in 10 years time, 15 years from now. So, you know, there are a lot of exciting developments to come. So just, I wanted to touch briefly on CAP and how the farm to fork will interact with CAP. The Common Agricultural Policy, as you know, is coming to an end. And the negotiations for the new CAP have been ongoing now for some time, and they have been delayed, as you've all read, I'm sure, in the media. What we know is that there's going to be increased environmental ambition for the next CAP. So, you know, there will be a requirement for each member state to prepare a CAP strategic plan. So this CAP strategic plan will basically be Ireland's plan for, you know, how we, you know, the plans we have and how we propose to spend our money when the budget becomes clearer over the next 7-year period. It will definitely, our CAP strategic plan will definitely have to reflect some of the requirements in farm to fork. So we expect later this year that the Commission might give Ireland the first indication of where they would see Ireland in terms of some of them high-level targets that I touched on earlier. So, you know, Ireland, you know, as a country, we would use relatively small amounts of pesticides vis-a-vis some other countries. So they may not look for a 50% reduction in pesticide use in Ireland. They may focus maybe more on the water quality issue and maybe hone in on nutrient use efficiency. So maybe later this year or early next year, we'll have a kind of a greater sense, you know, of the Commission's thinking, you know, around some of these high level targets. And then obviously we will have to, you know, take account of those, you know, recommendations coming from the Commission as we develop our CAP strategic plan. It is going to be different. There's going to be an eco scheme, a long-term and agri-environmental scheme. There will be probably some changes in conditionality also. We don't have all the details at this stage, but, you know, one proposal from the Commission is around, you know, around the tree crop rule. There might be increased requirements for crop rotation. Many of you will be you know, using crop rotation on your farms already. So, you know, it may not be, you know, onerous from that point of view, but for people that don't use crop rotation, there may be issues there. But nothing has been finalized around CAP. The budget hasn't been finalized. What we know at this stage is that we are looking probably at least a year's delay and maybe a 2-year delay. It's looking more likely that the new CAP won't come into the 1st of January 2023, but that's not finalised yet. I think by the end of the year, we should be in a much better position. So how does the tillage sector, I suppose, ensure sustainable food production? These are just a few ideas I jotted down, you know, ideas that, you know, Teagasc and the department will have to look at, you know, together in association with the industry. Clearly, we're going to have to optimize the use of inputs, whether that be fertilizer or pesticides. As I've already said, the tillage sector is starting from a good point. It's already the most efficient user of nitrogen, but there's probably still room for improvement. Sourcing organic manures to replace chemical N. Many of you will use, you know, pig and poultry manure on your farms, you know, to build, you know, soil fertility. And replace the chemical N requirements. So those sort of practices are going to be encouraged into the future. Cover crops in spring production, it won't work everywhere, but certainly there will be options in the future, trying to keep more nitrogen within the system, reduce leaching, and then reduce hopefully that chemical demand for the following crop. IPM I've touched on, crop rotation is going to become key. Decision support systems around IPM, there's probably more research needed on this for Irish specific growing conditions. So there's certainly a role for Teagasc and the universities to look at this in more detail as we go forward. Practices that maintain high levels of soil organic matter, as I touched on cover crops, mint-till, many of you will be working with mint-till systems. Again, it doesn't work for everyone, but that's something that, you know, will help maintain your soil organic matter. So, you know, the circular economy is going to create opportunities, producing bioenergy, growing more domestic protein for the livestock sector. This is absolutely going to become mainstream, I feel, you know, in the years ahead. The livestock sector cannot, you know, continue to import, you know, cheap sources of protein and rely on that kind of continually. So there's a huge opportunity here, both, you know, within the Origin Green and within that program to produce more domestic protein. And our tillage farmers are best placed, you know, to grow those crops. But also opportunities in biorefineries, bio-based crops, bio-based fertilizers. New innovations are happening there. There's huge funding going into these areas, and they're going to start to become more commercial, you know, in the years ahead. Plant health will become key, access to quality seeds for different plant varieties, you know, in relation to pests and diseases. The organic area probably will increase. It's not going to be for everyone, but certainly there's some farmers out there that will consider it. You know, there are very high returns for organic crops at the moment. People can't get enough of them, and I think we're importing some of them into the country. So clearly there are opportunities there. So look, we're in a good starting position. We have a recognized brand in Origin Green. You know, we need to try and protect that now and develop that. You know, Origin Green is being reviewed at the moment. Many of the farm to fork actions align well with the Teagasc MAC curve and the draft acclimatized roadmap. The farm to fork will create space for new green business models. There's a possibility we'll be looking at a carbon trading scheme at farm level. Again, tillage farmers may be well placed there. Look, there may be an opportunity as well in the future. Obviously, you know, some people are moving away from an animal-based diet. You know, so we can't fight that. We have to look at that, and there may well be an opportunity for tillage farmers to grow more plant-based products for human consumption also. Liam Condon gave an excellent address at the ASA conference last week. It's about 9 minutes long. I would urge you after this presentation or at some stage over the weekend to just go into YouTube and Google the Agricultural Science Association and look at that address, because Liam really kind of explains much better than I'd ever be able to do the reality of where, you know, farming is going. It's going to become so data driven. And it's really, there's going to be sensors, and it's going to blow your mind, you know, the innovation that's going to happen in the sector in the years ahead. So look, finally, challenges exist. You know, the targets, as I said, if they're applied to each member state, will be challenging, particularly on pesticides. I think that's the one the tillage farmer would have most concern on. Look, harmonisation of voluntary green claims can threaten the uniqueness of Origin Green. It's a very unique programme. If everyone starts doing this, well, you know, how are we going to differentiate ourselves on world markets? You know, behavioural change will be required at farm level. We're going to do things differently than we have done things up to now. Nutritional labelling and recommended dietary allowances will come under particular focus. We are concerned about the definition of local supply chains. You know, if you look at Ireland, we trade to 180 countries all over the world, you know, so having that open access globally is really important to us. So look, there's a number of implications and challenges just more generally for the industry. But look, we as a department, you know, will continue to engage, you know, with our colleagues in Brussels, you know, as the development of farm to fork comes clearer, you know, over the years ahead. So thank you, Michael. I'll hand it back to you.
Dale, thanks very much. Thanks for all that. There's certainly a lot in there. There's a lot, I suppose, still to play for in terms of, you know, going across to Europe, as you say, talking to your colleagues over there. So probably in the next 6 months, it'll start become slowly but surely become a little bit clearer. And we
should know more, Michael, yeah, over the next 6 months or so. So obviously we'll be watching this, you know, the development of this very closely.
Okay, thank you very much, Dale. Okay, so look, we're going to move on. Just want to remind people that they might just ask a question. If you have a question that you want to ask, just go down to the Q&A session there, depending on the device you're on. Ask your question and send it in. So if it comes to you, we'll get to it, and the only person that sees that question is yourself. So we'll get to it when we can. So just invite Michael. I think you're nearly ready to go there. So Michael, I'm going to hand over to you to give us an update on maybe what we already know, that the tillage industry is the best industry in Ireland. Across to you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Wallace. I'm Professor of Agricultural Economics at the University College Dublin, and I'm delighted to join the Tillage Forum this evening. The objective of my presentation is to outline some of the key messages from the economic assessment report that I prepared for Tillage Industry Ireland. And I think the first point I would acknowledge here is that probably this type of analysis has been long overdue, that the contribution of the Irish tillage sector hasn't really been fully evaluated before in terms of its contribution to Irish agriculture, to the national economy, in terms of output and employment, and to the fabric of rural areas. You know, obviously an exercise like that involves a variety of dimensions which have been covered in the report. And what I plan to do is just to highlight a couple of key messages under each of those main sections of the report, which are in those headings are covered in the sort of the middle of this slide. And really, I think the objective or the role of this type of analysis is hopefully to feed in to the formation of the strategy for the sector going forward, and hopefully to be able to support the industry in that form. So I suppose the first thing to acknowledge is the evolving structure within the tillage industry, and obviously some of the important challenges, particularly around the decline in tillage area that has occurred over time. Now, on this chart, as you can see, showing both the change in tillage area and also the numbers of growing units, farms with tillage crops, going back really to 1980 up to 2018. And you can see really, you know, we've seen a reduction in tillage area of about over 40% since 1980, going from 560,000 hectares back then to about 320,000 hectares today. And really, I suppose it has tracked the kind of policy evolution within the CAP, particularly, you know, the rapid decline in tillage area in the 1980s, as you know, reforms of the Common Agricultural Policy impacted directly on the tillage sector. Areas stabilized through the McSherry era in the 1990s with the supports to the tillage sector through the area aid payments. And then really since the decoupling era and the introduction of the single farm payment, we've seen a rapid reduction, which also coincided with the loss of the sugar beet industry. And hence we had that kind of dip in 2004. And then I suppose most recently we've seen tillage land moving across, switching into dairying after the removal of quotas. And indeed, over the last 10 years, we've seen about 15% reduction in tillage area. Numbers of tillage farms, as you can see, has fallen by more than 50% since 1991. So quite dramatic change within the industry over this prolonged period of time. But I think on the positive, what we note is that the level of production has remained much more robust, and that is testament to the productivity of the sector. And here I've just shown levels of annual production of cereals going back to 1985. And if we look at the kind of last 5 years, averaging 2.3 million tons of cereals per annum produced. And, you know, that has been on par with levels that have been achieved over this historical time horizon. So the industry has been really productive, and productivity has increased, allowing it to maintain levels of output within the sector. I suppose just to kind of sum up really what has been happening around the kind of structure has been a lot of those changes that we've just seen have been driven by the exit of mixed farms from the sector, you know, traditionally mixed livestock and crop farms, which have, you know, certainly over the sort of last decade or so have declined by around about 40%. So those kind of smaller cropping enterprises have exited, and I think in part reflecting opportunity costs associated with high con-acre rents and the opportunities that some farmers can get from potentially leasing out land to a dairy farmer. So there are some of those effects, competition for land, which has been an important driver here. But what I would again point out again is that on the positive side, we have a strong hub of specialist tillage farms, around about 5,000 farms. It's a fairly compact sector. They're productive, they're commercially focused. We know that they're internationally competitive, as Teagasc research has shown, have a younger demographic, certainly compared to the average for agriculture. And in terms of profitability, they're second only to dairying in that regard. And certainly if we look at levels of profitability measured on a per labor unit basis, given the differences in labor use intensity between, say, dairying and tillage, tillage competes quite comfortably with that, and has only lagged slightly behind dairy farms on a farm income basis per labor unit. The sort of second area that I wanted to just briefly touch on is on trade, and I think this is one of the most striking things that should be noted in the report, really, that has been the dramatic increase in net imports of tillage products. And that is particularly, as you can see on this slide, reflected in the increase in maize imports as the main competitor to the domestically grown cereals. So you can see that expansion in that orange bar in the middle of the chart, really going up there to reaching as much as 1.6 million tons of imports of maize in 2018. But looking at it over a number of years, we're in excess of 1 million tons of maize each year being imported, and that is potentially the main competitor that the domestic cereal production is actually facing. Has been the growth of those imports, particularly of maize. And again, looking at it in terms of feed ingredients, we've had an upward trend in terms of net imports, with imports increasing on a linear trend basis of about 113,000 tons extra net imports of feed ingredients per annum. So again, I think there are reasons for concern about this increase in net imports and the reliance of our livestock industries on increasing levels of feed imports over time. And in the report, I look at some of the other sectors, and it's a similar picture with increases in imports of, flour, for instance, also of potatoes as well. So let's maybe turn briefly to the supply chain. In the report, I spent quite a lot of time delving into the tillage supply chain in some depth, and looking at how the outputs of the sector have been utilized, what the various end uses are. And this just summary slide highlights the kind of direct output on average annual average over the 2014-18 period of about 640 million at farm level value of tillage output. And then how is that composed? How are those outputs then being utilized? Well, you can see feed cereals as almost half of it. And indeed, if you were to look at including fodder crops, that's the maize, fodder beet, and whole crop cereals, another 11%. So we're over 60, we're up to 60%, and then including the likes of the protein crops and indeed a portion of oilseed. Rape is also going into feed, taking us up to 60%, and some of the straw, again, over, could lead us to upwards of 70% of the outputs of the tillage sector are being utilized by the livestock industries or sectors within the country. You can see also the other components, and I'm going to maybe refer to one or two of these, but particularly the likes of the malting sector, about 8%, and then milling, which is primarily oats for the porridge oats market, about 1%. So we're predominantly focused on the feed industry. So let's look at maybe just a couple of those sectoral components here. Feed industry. Again, this picture of the reliance on net imports, native supply of about 2.3 million tons of ingredients going into the feed industry, and net imports of about 3.7 million tons of ingredients. So about 60 or something, slightly over 60% of total feed ingredients are being imported, and native supplies are just under 40%. So again, this has been increasing over time, this reliance on imports. You can see on the right-hand side of the slide here, about 60% of cereals that are being used in feed manufacture are native sourced, but only 7% of protein. So I suppose on one hand, we have a challenge here, but there's also an important opportunity, the potential for domestic supplies to replace some of those net imports in the orange part of that chart. On the brewing and distilling side, again, domestic grain here, native barley, about 250,000 tons going into the drinks industry, accounting for about 65% of grain that they're utilizing. But on the right-hand side, you can see again the import component, about 35%. That's principally into distilling. And again, the big component there is maize, of about 115,000 tons per annum of maize going into the drinks industry, imported maize. So again, the kind of competitor to native barley to the drinks industry. So, virtually all the grain or barley that's used for the brewing industry comes from native sources, but for the distilling industry, it's about 2 out of every 5 tons of grain used are from native sources. So what about the economic impact of the sector? How is this measured? Well, I think the importance here is recognizing the breadth of the tillage industry in terms of the outputs being used by a whole multitude of downstream sectors. We mentioned feed, but also into food production and in the drink industries. So, the breadth of the sector is immense, and therefore its economic reach is very significant. Also, tillage farms are important utilizers of inputs, and of course that is supporting input supply industries, many of them of a specialized nature that wouldn't exist in the absence of the sector. So inputs expenditures are around about 420 million per annum by the tillage industry, net investment another 55 million, and household expenditures supported by the tillage industry are about 200 million. Now this is farm household expenditures. So very, very substantial contribution to rural communities, and obviously with the tillage industry being concentrated of additional output that's generated. We refer to it as indirect output or upstream in the supply chain, which is about another 665 million. So we have over, when you put those two elements together, the overall economic contribution of the tillage sector to economic output is about 1.3 billion. So it's a very, very sizable contribution. And if you looked at that on a per 1,000 hectares of tillage, it's about almost 4 million euro contribution to the economy per 1,000 hectares of tillage. By sectoral comparison here, you can see that the tillage sector actually punches above its weight. The highest here, this is measured in gross output in the economy per 1,000 hectares utilized. Dairy obviously is a high output sector and is the highest in terms of performance on this metric, but tillage is not far behind it. And it just shows the how the sector punches above its weight in terms of economic contribution. Employment also very important, about 7,500 full-time equivalent employees at farm level, a further estimate at least 3,400 in the supply chain. So we have employment of approximately 11,000 in the sector as a conservative estimate. And that equates to about 32 employees in the economy per 1,000 hectares of tillage. So again, a considerable impact. The very last thing that I'm just going to point out is in relation to on the environmental side, and just one measure, which is on the carbon footprint. I do in the report look at some of the other benefits of the tillage sector, for example, in terms of contributing to biodiversity. What I think what's important to recognize is the economic value of a sector is often being matched or compared against its environmental footprint. And on this regard, the tillage sector performs very, very well. So I just have one slide here showing that effect really of what is the carbon footprint of the tillage sector per hectare. Well, it's about 1.2 tons of carbon CO2 equivalent per hectare utilized at average levels of efficiency. And you can see compared to, for instance, the dairy sector at about 8.6 tons, and beef systems are around about 4 tons of carbon. So it's a very carbon efficient sector. And, you know, we have to recognize that as land has transferred from tillage over into dairying, that obviously has an impact then on our overall agricultural carbon footprint, which I highlight here at the bottom in terms of kind of what kinds of levels of land has shifted across from tillage into dairying over the last decade or so, and the potential impact that may have on national CO2 emissions. just then to wrap up here, because I'm out of time, what I do emphasize in the report is that the tillage sector absolutely has a pivotal role in a balanced agricultural sector at the national level. And I think that needs to be recognized in our national agri-food strategy, that it has that role. And I think, as I've mentioned already, the importance of acknowledging the impact of increasing net imports, particularly of animal feed, and how that may be perceived in terms of the impacts on sustainability of our livestock industries. There are key market opportunities here in terms of replacing imports. And I always think it's easier to replace imports than try and grow your market through exports. So we have a captive domestic market that isn't being fully met from domestic supplies, and there are real opportunities. And I think I want to emphasize the importance of a collaborative approach within the industry. And we can maybe get into some of that in questions if necessary, but I think it's really obvious that we need to kind of pull together as an industry, whether it's between farmers and the potential for cropping agreements that may involve tillage and livestock farmers, and help them, tillage farmers, be able to access land more readily, spread overhead costs, that there are potential opportunities there. Looking at how our supply chains operate, our further investment in research and advisory, and indeed policy supports. We've seen how successful the protein aid scheme has been, more than doubling the area of protein crops since it was introduced. And these kinds of policy interventions can have a major impact. And lastly, I just want to emphasize the strong credence characteristics associated with Irish origin and branding. And I think we can do more with that, getting recognition for that, for Irish tillage as part of our sustainability schemes. So I leave it there. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Michael. That was great. There's a lot in that. It's a huge report, and I think it's a report that will be looked at by whether it's industry people, policy people, and certainly students for the next long number of years, Michael. So congratulations on the report. It's a fantastic report. Look, we're a little bit over time. We're probably about 5 or 6 minutes over time from where we should have been. But we have a presentation from Donald Fitzgerald, who is from Gold Crop and the chair of the Tillage stakeholder group. So Donald we're not able to be with us this evening, so he's pre-recorded for us. So I'm going to just play that video here now.
Good evening, everyone. Donald Fitzgerald is my name. I work with Gold Crop, but I'm also chairman of the Teagasc Tillage Stakeholder Consultative Group. And I've been asked to speak this evening about our new report called Crops 2030, which we've recently launched and which many of you probably will have read about. So just, I suppose, to give a brief update of who we are and what it's about. So that every few years, Teagasc will have different stakeholder groups put together across all the various sectors of the industry. And in our stakeholder group for tillage, we have 12 members who are listed on the right-hand side, 5 of which are farmers, 2 from the trade. There's 2 people from specific areas, as in food, oats and energy, and that's Maria O'Toole and Paddy O'Toole from Quinns. And we have 3 from other industry sources. So we have John Keogh from AFA, and we have myself, Gold Crop from the seed industry, and Andy Doyle as a tillage expert. So you have the picture there, which was taken about 3 weeks ago in Oak Park with Minister Martin Hayden, who met us, and we launched a report. And it's just to say that it's not the first report that's been compiled by the tillage stakeholders. We did another report back in 2012 at the time of the new CAP, which was being launched at that stage. And we presented it to Minister Coveney, who at the time was Minister for Agriculture. That group was chaired by Larry O'Reilly. And, I suppose we got a number of positive traction out of that, or positive action, sorry, out of that report. Including, I suppose, the protein aid scheme, which came to fruition in 2014. I think that was the first year that came out, but there was a lot of lobbying went on before that in 2013, following on from this report to get that over the line. There was also some concessions done in terms of long-term leasing and some tax incentives that were given on that. And that was one of the recommendations that came from this report as well. But there was also many other, I suppose, recommendations that we felt didn't really come to light or didn't get a fair hearing. And so I suppose that spurred us maybe looking at, enhancing or improving or even republishing the crops report that we did back then. And so we came up with the idea of doing something new, because, to be fair, the relevance of the previous report had become outdated. A lot of the recommendations and figures and aspirations that were published in the report were prior to the abolition of milk quotas, and subsequently, I suppose, a lot of those ambitions became, irrelevant and not appropriate. We also felt that coming out of the previous report, we had a number of engagements with the high-level implementation committee of the Department of Agriculture, and I also participated, and the stakeholder group were invited to participate in the Tillage Forum, which was convened by Minister Creed about 3 or 4 years ago. But we felt as a group that there wasn't really anything tangible that came out of that. So maybe an opportunity to relaunch something was good. And we wanted to do it in time for the new CAP and the new Farm to Fork proposals which have been released. And we also knew that Tillage Industry Ireland, and you've just heard from Michael Wallace prior to me about his report. And so I suppose having two reports coming together is unusual, but it was also a great opportunity for the tillage industry to have its say and to make claims about what we could do and what ambitions we might have. We've also, I suppose, seen now the credentials of the industry are very strong, particularly from an environmentally sustainability point of view. When we produced the previous report back in 2012, there was very little reference, if any, to carbon efficiencies and greenhouse gas. A bit of greenhouse gases, but things like carbon footprinting and carbon efficiencies weren't really that much in the spotlight. Sorry. So we have, that's obviously very much in the media now. And the tillage sector is very good that way. We have a very high level of nutrient efficiency. Our carbon footprinting is very low, especially with native grain. And, from an economic point of view, the family farm income data that's published by Teagasc each year shows that the tillage sector is generally very competitive against other enterprises, in particularly the dry stock sector. And, it's referenced at the start of the report, and I have seen media reports about it since, that the term weak appreciation for the sector has been referenced. And, that is something that we sometimes feel we're forgotten about. And for those of us that are in this sector and are passionate about it, we want to try and make sure we get to have our say when we need to have it. So just briefly, just to give an overview of how it's laid out. The focus is very much on sustainability, and we have identified a number of scientific and research-led solutions. I think that's very important going forward, that the debate about farming and the future of farming sometimes can be swayed by influences which are not scientifically led. And obviously from our point of view and from a Teagasc point of view, it's important that those scientific solutions are put to the fore. It contains a number of factual statistics and information about tillage in Ireland, which also backs up what the Tillage Industry Ireland report has already come up with. We decided also to kind of focus on sectoral analysis rather than going through it crop by crop. In the previous report, we went through it, barley, oats, wheat, various different types of crops that might be grown in the country. We felt that maybe if we focused on the end use of the produce that we're growing, it would be better, and you could tie the various crops into the one portfolio. We've identified the existing and future challenges to the sector, and we've laid them out as best we can, and we've come up with 54 recommendations on what we call the actions to achieve potential, and they're laid out around in the report. I suppose one key difference as well in terms of the report that we've done now versus the report that was done back in 2012 is that we have an awful lot more of infographics and a lot more effort to put into the design and layout of the document, so that the information is portrayed in a very reader-friendly way, And we would hope that the data and the information that's presented is very palatable to the reader, and it's easily, shall we say, taken up and absorbed by the person who reads it, whether they are a very experienced farmer with an in-depth knowledge of the tillage industry, or they're a policymaker, or even if there's somebody who has no background knowledge on farming but is looking to learn a few key facts about the tillage sector. And already we've seen and heard that semi-state bodies like Enterprise Ireland have taken on our document and are looking at it keenly to see is there opportunities for them to develop the crop sector in areas of plant products. So just a few things, I suppose, just to go through what are the key messages we put out there. Was one of the ones that's been published a lot is the carbon reduction. As I said earlier, Irish tillage has a very good carbon footprint, and Irish grain has a carbon equivalent per hectare of 1.18 tonnes. That's the figure that has come from the National Farm Survey. And that, compares very favorably against some of the imports that are coming in from abroad, particularly from South America. We also have a situation where, the dairy footprint and the beef footprint is higher. And so the Irish tillage sector can be very useful in achieving a national target. By having more grain, we're displacing more of the CO2 equivalent that might come from the dairy herd, and we're helping that sector out. And we would like to think that, producing more Irish grain will help to support the displacement of imports that have, poorer or, less efficient carbon credentials. This also leads on to a bit about provenance and assurance. And I suppose one of the big bugbears of a lot of our members, especially the farming people involved, is the fact that their hands are tied in terms of what they're told they can produce and how they can produce it. And they go to the trouble of having cross compliance and having proper PCS numbers on their chemicals and making sure everything is done in an environmentally friendly way. And then the price for the produce they have, which is fully traceable and quality assured, is pitched against something that's coming from a boat from a faraway land that might not be produced to the same standards. And that's, I suppose, we think that's the chink in the armour that needs to be fixed. And we have a really good reputation as a producer of food, and we're producing a lot of meat and dairy products which are going to be exported around the world, and we're looking to brand them under the Origin Green logo. And we think that why not back that up with more traceable and locally sourced grain and imported feed products, which hopefully can substitute the imported alternative. Currently, we're importing over 60 feed ingredients from around the world, and is there a way for us to close that loop and produce more stuff at home? New technologies, it's key going forward. Dale has already presented the information on the farm to fork, and it's all about sustainability. It's all about reducing inputs, reducing the effect on the environment, while hopefully maintaining or increasing output. And the challenges are great, and the numbers are going to be a big challenge to try and to meet in terms of a 50% reduction in plant protection products, a 20% reduction in fertilizer usage, and possibly a 25% proportion of organic produce in the market. And to do all this, we need new technologies in the form of plant breeding, in the form of plant protection products, in the form of precision agriculture, etc. And one of the greatest challenges that we see is how we communicate effectively and positively with consumers regarding the benefits of new technology. Oftentimes, people's opinions are swayed by social media influences and by people who do not have a vested interest in agriculture. And sometimes the farmer is portrayed as somebody who's more of a polluter than somebody who's more of a caretaker of the countryside. And we need, those are the things that need to be sorted. And economic sustainability is really the core principle of what we were trying to do here. We want to try and make sure that we're getting the most we can for the produce we have, and that we're feeding into an industry that's generating jobs, creating employment, and you know, sustaining rural communities and the economy. And we are producing a lot of malting barley here, which is feeding into a drink sector. There's opportunities to do more, perhaps. The food oats has been a great success, and we can produce some of the best oats in the world. There's an opportunity perhaps for cold pressed rapeseed oil to go into, you know, for use in home markets. And if, you know, Ireland, the land of the humble spud, we're well associated with it, but we are importing currently between 70 and 80,000 tonnes per year. And there is an opportunity, we think, to replace 75% of those imports with domestically grown produce. And of course, the socio-economic sustainability, this is the piece that we want to try and keep, you know, when we're putting on, why are we doing all this? We're doing it for the benefit of the nation. The key stats are we have 11,000 people directly employed, and 90% of the farm income that's earned from farms is spent within a 35-kilometre radius of the farm and of the home. I think a telling statistic is the number of young people in farming. The average age of the farmer in Ireland is 59, and only 20% of the farmers in the country are under the age of 50, the tillage farmers in the country. So there's a lot to be done to try and attract new people into farming, and unless that, you know, there's a sustainable level of income and an attractive work-life balance in place, you know, you won't be getting these young people into farming, and that's something we need to be very conscious of. To keep the future of agriculture going, and that applies to every sector in agriculture. So that's just a flavour of what I can do in the short time that I have. I have to thank everybody who contributed to producing this report. If you'd like to read more about it, it's available to download on the Teagasc website. The link is there, and also there are printed copies available on request. If you ask your local Teagasc advisor or contact myself, I certainly prefer to read something when it's printed and bound, and it's easier to go through it. And I have to compliment all my colleagues on the group and indeed the Teagasc Secretariat, who did a fantastic job. And I'd like to reference also the team at AK Graphics, who did a super job in putting together the final report. So thanks, Michael. I'll pass you back, and thanks for the opportunity to speak this evening.
Okay, that was great, and thanks very much to Donal as well. So look, we are probably a little bit over time, and I'm going to invite all the guests, Michael and Pat and Dale, just to turn on your video and turn on your sound as well, just so we can see everybody here. So basically, we are just got a little bit over time. In fairness, I did put down the marker and challenge the presenters to try and keep within time. But in fairness, the amount and breadth of information that was there by all of the speakers, it's very hard to condense it into to much smaller than it did. So they did a great job. So because of that, we're a little bit short on time. So I'm just going to flag it to everybody out there. I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to flag it to everybody out there. We're probably going to run a little bit over time. So instead of finishing directly on the at 7:30, we're probably going to run on for probably around 5 or maybe 10 minutes longer. But I think it's worthwhile focusing on some of the questions that are coming through. So Dale, I'm going to come to you first, if you don't mind. We have a question there, which is about all the challenges coming down the tillage to the tillage sector, as you mentioned, about reduced fertilizers and reduced pesticide use, 20% of fertilizers, 50% from pesticides, which this question says will lead to reduced yields. And I suppose the question coming from that, will the primary producer be rewarded with increased prices the far side?
Thank you, Michael. I suppose the challenge for everyone, including all the people working in the sector, is to try and avoid a situation, you know, where we do see reduced yields. That's clearly the challenge. I think, you know, in terms of CAP and what it can do, you know, we need to try and design our schemes, you know, to try and get more tillage farmers into the schemes. Traditionally, you know, they haven't, you know, participated in strong numbers. So, you know, I do see that as an issue that the department, you know, will need to look at in the future in terms of, you know, designing our schemes under CAP when we develop our CAP strategic plan.
Okay. Thanks, Dale. Michael, one for you here. I suppose the tillage industry is quite dependent on the basic payment coming through the door. And the question is, any idea how convergence will affect the tillage income of farmers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the tillage sector has been particularly adversely impacted by convergence, because prior to convergence, the average entitlement values in tillage were the highest among all the sectors. I think the average for tillage was about 381, but of course there are farmers that would have had higher values than that, particularly where they had stacked entitlements and so forth. So I think it's well acknowledged that tillage farmers have particularly borne the brunt of convergence more than any other sector in Irish agriculture. I don't have a specific calculation for that, of how much that has detrimentally impacted farm incomes, but by the kind of nature of the fact that they've had a higher average entitlement values at the start, those effects have kind of factored through. And I think that they have been one of the driving forces around farmers' decisions that they've made, particularly in some cases, reducing or getting out of tillage.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Pat, I'm going to come to you. There's a question here on, I suppose there's one question asked, what's preventing the growth of tillage to offset some of the massive imports? And another question goes on to say, is it the cost or is it that imports are too competitive and our industry can't compete against those?
Yeah, well, I suppose there is a problem. I suppose maize is what, barley is probably our biggest crop, and maize is what we're competing against. And there is GMO derived varieties which are approved to come in. So that's what we're competing with. Here in Europe, we haven't adopted these technologies for various different reasons, and there hasn't been as great a growth in yield in our native crops as there has been in particularly maize in the States, and probably soybean as well. And the benchmark to which our Irish grain is valued tends to be what stuff can be landed at the port. Really, the challenge for us is to try and create a preference for Irish grain and get a premium for it, rather than probably working at best at par with imports or sometimes at a discount. And with PGI and grass-fed beef and milk, is there some place, I throw out a challenge to Board B and people like that, is there a place for them to get more involved in the grain side of things and try and create a premium for Irish grain so that it can be somehow spliced in to this grass-fed idea? Because I suppose really it's a fallacy. Grass-fed beef, most beef does get some level of cereals in order to try and finish them. And is there a premium place for Irish grain in that picture?
Okay, so demand needs to be created as much as us being able to produce it. Okay.
Yeah, preference needs to be created.
Michael, I'm going to come to you again. You might have an answer to this. A question is asked about how does the multiplier effect for tillage compare to other sectors?
Right. I mean, there was a study done a few years ago by a Trinity PhD student that can try to answer that question. The highest multiplier in Irish agriculture that she estimated was for the beef sector, and was about 2.5, and she had a multiplier just only slightly behind that for tillage. So tillage was second only to the beef sector. I think her estimate of the multiplier for dairying was about, I think, maybe 1.7, 1.8. So tillage multiplier is high, second only to the beef sector, which is the one with the highest multiplier overall. Okay,
thank you. Dale, I'm going to throw you this one here. The question is, there's new breeding techniques are out there and must be included as part of the Green Deal. However, there's no real mention of the likes of gene editing in that. And the question is asked is, will the department be raising this issue at commission level?
Yeah, look, that's a good question, I suppose, particularly in the context of reducing inputs. You know, what's the trade-off going to be? I think, interestingly, in the farm to fork strategy, it does make specific reference to increased uses of biotechnology. So that is certainly, you know, something that may give some hope, you know, to techniques like gene editing possibly becoming more socially acceptable, you know, to the European consumer. But ultimately, it's the European consumer that's going to drive this and dictate and determine, you know, whether that we ultimately were able to use, you know, some of these new technologies. But I think for the first time in a kind of commission document, the fact that they referenced it, you know, so explicitly, it'll be something that obviously we'll be keeping a close eye on. But, you know, there are challenges around it. You know, obviously we don't need to go into the issues around GMOs, you know, and the reluctance around that, you know, from a European consumer. Obviously, some people know I spent 4 years in the US as agattache, and it's something that came up all the time. So look, we'll watch this space. It's certainly something the department will watch closely. You know, in terms of, you know, providing alternative tools and that use of technology that I talked about earlier in my presentation, it has to be kind of key, and it may well be, you know, part of the future for farming systems in Europe.
Thanks, Dale. You certainly mentioned before IPM and how important IPM is going to be to the industry. I think there's a recognition certainly around Teagasc and in, you know, the research circles that you can't cure everything with IPM in the sense of tools, and the breeding is a huge part of that IPM mix, if you like. So that whole gene editing hopefully will be there. I have another question here, and it was addressed to Michael, but I'm actually going to ask it to you, Pat. And the question is around the climate here in Ireland from the point of view of sustainable protein production. That beans haven't done so well. They've very much been up and down over the last number of years. And how suitable is the Irish climate to producing a lot of protein?
Well, there's a big deficit there. We produce 6 million tons of feed. We produce probably 2.2. That's mainly barley, wheat and oats, and along with 60, 70, 80,000 ton of beans. So there is a massive deficit there. Beans have been a bit of a Cinderella crop. Some years go, they don't like dry weather, they don't like land. I think my own view is maybe we should be back focusing a bit more on rape. We definitely need a break crop. The gear is all there to harvest the rape. There's a market there. There's many markets there for the oil. There's definitely a market there for the protein cake. I think we should be concentrating our efforts maybe more so back on rape. Beans, from a processor point of view, start coming in this time of year. They're the end of the harvest. They're not so bad this year, but last year there was a lot of stuff, 32% moisture last week of October. They do pose many problems, and there's not really an infrastructure in there to deal with them. So maybe we should be just casting our net a little bit further and try and promote rape and expand that acreage.
Okay, yeah, I suppose there's many things, and maybe just a comment, because it was brought up by some of my colleagues earlier in the year, just in terms of, as you mentioned, a Cinderella crop, that the yields can fluctuate up and down. I think if we compare that to even cereal crops, they fluctuate up and down as well. So it mightn't be as bad as we think. But it's certainly an area, I think, Pat, you might agree that needs the continued protein support for it to remain a crop at all in Ireland. Yeah,
totally.
Okay. I'm going to go across to you, Michael, again. I'm going to ask you one here, because I think you mentioned it before as you were going by it. And the question is, as increased feed grains and non-feed grain imports, are they undermining the credibility of Origin Green with regard to our exports of dairy and beef?
And I think this has to be a factor that we do have to consider as, as we look at our sustainability credentials going forward, and as we have a very strong image for a very positive image for our livestock products. But as we increasingly rely on imported supplementary feed, I feel personally that does negatively impinge on the sustainability credentials of our livestock industries. And I think it is something that will come under more spotlight as we go forward. So I think that is something that needs to be borne in mind. And indeed, the tillage industry is obviously part of the solution to that problem that the livestock side faces.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. Dale, I'm just going to go to you. Maybe you kind of a couple of rapid fire questions there. You might have a short answer to them. The first one here is will there be a new reference year for farmers going forward? And the second one you might answer maybe in the same one. What proportion of the new BPS will be linked to the environmental controls, such as the eco scheme?
Okay, yeah, there'll be no new reference here, Michael. So any entitlements you had, within the current cap, they'll transfer to the new programming period. Just on I suppose nothing has been settled on the budgets yet, on how that money is going to be divided out between the various programs. It's clear that a significant portion of the budget will be on kind of climate measures, or focused on those measures that are going to promote, ambition around climate and environmental protection. But nothing has been decided. I think it's going to be into next year before any real clarity emerges in some of these issues.
Okay, Pat, I just have one last one for you here, and it's along the lines of the, it was mentioned by Donald there, and it's certainly mentioned in the Crops 2030, that feed is obviously the biggest market here for Ireland. And how do you see an all Irish or native grains, if you like, all native ration work?
We don't have the raw materials to make it, really. As I say, we have less than 100,000 tonne of beans to play with. Small amount of, a lot of our rape is exported, small amount of rape. It'll be sectoral, it'll be niche-y. We have had requests from in our business and Liffey Mills for some people to make some feed, and some people that have abattoirs and stuff like that, but I don't think it's on a large scale. It's not going to amount to a hill of beans, to be honest with you.
But there is potential nonetheless. We might go with the positive angle.
But it's very niche, but there is potential. Okay. But it's niche. It's not going to become mainstream. You just don't have the tons to play around with. Okay,
I'm going to ask one final one then to Michael. Michael, a question in here about how do you think a hard Brexit, maybe it's not in your report, but how will a hard Brexit affect the tillage sector, you think?
Okay. Actually, the tillage sector is much less exposed to Brexit than our other components of Irish agriculture, and that's primarily because it's less dependent on exports, for one thing, and the other aspect is that most of our imports are coming through from the UK. So a hard Brexit would mean that there'll be probably more barriers to some of those imports coming in, and that actually may have an upward movement in our own domestic grain prices, which is good news for tillage farmers, but probably not so good for livestock, which could get a double whammy.
Michael, on that very positive news,
okay.
we might leave the questions there. So look, we're a little bit over time, and I apologise for that, but I see most people have stuck with us. So thanks very much, everybody, sticking with us. I want to thank Dale and Michael, Donald Fitzgerald for doing the video for us, and Pat Ryan for filling in for Donald for the questions, and also Shay Phelan, who's helping me out here in the background with the technology end of it. So a very huge thank you to all the participants who joined us, but also who asked questions on the evening, because that certainly, it makes it a more challenging for everybody. So thanks very much for that. And just to mention again, as regards the reports, Michael's report, and also Michael's report, just to say, is available at tillageindustry.ireland.ie. You can download that there, and the Crops 2030 report is available at on the Teagasc website, teagasc.ie. So look, I'm not going to try and sum up all the information that was given today, but I just again want to add something small at the end, as I did last week. And it's around, I suppose, where farmers are finding that harvest difficulties are having harvest difficulties. and there will be difficulties with incomes on those farms. So I suppose I'm really encouraging those farmers to contact our tillage team. They are available to help everybody in terms of, planning, whether it's a farm level planning or agronomy, but also in trying to help farmers in terms of their cash flow or other financial needs on the farm. So look, just for farmers out there, pick up the phone, whether you're looking at this live or whether you're looking at this video back over the weekend or next week. Pick up the phone, have a chat, because often it's a case of, and as I said this last week as well, a problem shared is a problem halved. So it's well worth looking after. So finally, I just want to remind everybody that we produce a podcast now. It is called the Tillage Edge podcast. So it's a podcast that discusses agronomy, environmental issues, and most recently we discussed some of the financial tools available to farmers, and also what the markets are going to look like over the next number of months. So we talk to experts across the country and further afield. So if you're spending long hours over the next month or 6 weeks getting in the next round of crops in the tractor cab, download it onto your phone, have a listen to them. They're generally about 15 minutes long, so it's a great way to pass some time. You can learn a little bit while you're sitting there and pondering the world that you're ploughing or sowing. And they are available on the Teagasc website, so teagasc.ie, on the Apple podcast or on Spotify. So you're going to get them in all of there. So again, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I very much want to thank all our contributors this evening as well. So we will see you the next time. Stay safe. So, and goodbye from everybody here. Thank you.